All right, guys, welcome to today's special presentation on bile acid diarrhea, aka BAM or bile acid malabsorption, or sometimes just green diarrhea, right? So it depends on what you're familiar with in your life, but hopefully we'll be able to go over some solutions today that will get you somewhere more effectively and maybe even a point where you can stay well for an extended period of time without even having to take any medications at all. Okay, so who am I? My name is Dr. Houston Anderson. I've dealt with over 3,000 digestive cases. And over 2 years, I personally suffered from bile acid diarrhea. So once again, that's kind of what makes me the expert, the combination of the two. While there's no official expert on bile acid malabsorption or bile acid diarrhea other than your gastroenterologist, I have seen hundreds of cases of BAM specific diagnoses, and we get really, really good results. So over time, rather than make people come into my office and fly from all over the country, we decided to put it together in a course. And that's what I want to talk about today. But first of all, before I introduce anything like that, I want to kind of talk to you about what we're getting wrong in this world. Okay, how are the things? The first thing that I always say is, like, if you've already been trying the same thing, whether you've been trying any one of the natural approaches or a medical approach, the question is, where are you getting? So all of the protocols I design in my office are a combination of ancient formulas, of herbs, of wisdom, of protocols, of thought processes, of things that people have suggested previously. So for example, we all kind of have like our grandma's old remedies that we know about. Now, whether those work or not, my job as the doctor is to determine what the value is there. They all probably work, but they work for a different person, and that's my job to figure out. So luckily for digestion, I happen to know exactly where you're at right now. Everything that I offer is research-based. Don't be confused with the fact that the GI did not tell you these solutions. There's a lot of questions still in the gastroenterology world that don't have answers. So they can't give you an answer that they don't have, but a lot of these things are there. And then patient-oriented. A lot of protocols I see in functional medicine and other alternative medicine, they're for years and 6 months to 18 months. What I want to get is a home run for you, usually within 6 weeks. That's what we're aiming for. Sooner, some people are as soon as next day, but I'm really looking for a protocol that gives someone a home run in a short period of time. Okay, now let's go over some of the most common bile acid diarrhea myths. Once again, I'm going to call it bile acid diarrhea, and you'll see why in a few seconds. The first myth that we hear about is you're producing too much bile. Okay, so this is an interesting myth, but we'll go over in a second. The myth number 2 is you aren't absorbing enough bile. I call this the FXR hypothesis, but that's just about specific receptors in your intestines, and we don't need to go into that too much right now as far as what FXR is. And the third myth that we're going to talk about today is why you should not take binders to fix your problem, right? Because probably the most searched story is natural binders for bile acid diarrhea or bile acid malabsorption, but finding binders that are natural doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Okay, so myth number 1, are you producing too much bile? The common medical thought process is that your body is failing you, it's making you a mistake, but the truth is, in all of health, this is rarely the case. There's a few conditions which we could argue both ways, but in general, your body is an amazing organism and it's meant to heal itself. So most of us have that inherent understanding. I always use the example in my office, did you sew up your arm last time you had a cut or take some magical healing medication? Or did it just kind of like heal up on itself? Now, you could have a scar, it may not be perfect, but in general, when you have a cut on your arm, your body naturally knows what to do, okay? So the first myth is you're producing too much bile. We absolutely need bile acids, bile steroids, and bile salts, which are all kind of grouped into one lump sum in many, many discussions that we have. But these are critical. So if your body's making a lot of them, the question becomes why? Not that there's too much. The question is, why is your body making so many or so much of this fluid? Okay. Problem number 2, or myth number 2, you aren't absorbing bile, aka bile acid malabsorption. So this is the reason why I don't like to call it bile acid malabsorption. I like to call it bile acid diarrhea. 1, because the model is just too simple. Your body is highly efficient at reabsorbing bile. In fact, 95% of the bile you make every day is reabsorbed into the body. So let's just say that your body wasn't that good and it absorbed 90% or 85% or 75%. To get the amount of bile that most of my patients have in their stool, they would have to go from 95% effectiveness down to zero. And the question is like, why would you go from perfect or really, really good to really, really bad so dramatically? That doesn't really match the model of the body. It's not like one day your finger starts hurting and the next day it falls off. Our body doesn't do that. Usually it progresses. So anything that we can document in all of medicine, and we can have these fun arguments that start instantly, we have to come up with another hypothesis. It's not the old age hypothesis. It's breaking down over time. It's not the overuse hypothesis. Okay. So to keep it simple, when bile acids have too many toxins in them, they do not want to reabsorb. Your body does not want to reabsorb toxins. So as a defense mechanism, it will flush. And we see this all the time when you have something like the stomach flu. Your body is flushing the stomach in order to help you get better. Okay, so if we can fix the toxin issue, and what we call is a solute problem, there's too many solids in the liquid or too many, it could be a number of things, but I'll go over that in another time. But there can be a lot of things in this bile, and the bile is meant to bind it. And when there's too many things, your body has to get rid of it. So let's go to then myth number 3. And medications are the only answer, or binders are the only answer. The common go-to medication is cholestyramine, but medicine's getting more creative with some of these medications. And most people have tried kind of some of the over-counter medications before they go to cholestyramine. Let me teach you a new concept today that's a little bit different than maybe what your doctor told you. Any binder, natural or prescription, can improve your diarrhea, but the root cause usually has very little to do with quantities of bile. So anything that decreases bile or cholesterol is not the long-term solution. So you may want to read that twice, but it's important to know that addressing quantity of bile is not the secret. So if you have bile acid malabsorption and you use cholestyramine, then you stop, then you still have bile acid malabsorption. Or in other words, you didn't solve the problem. But in traditional thought processes, many people think that's adequate. You take the pill, it works better. But what I'm telling you is that you didn't solve a problem. And to me, this problem is solvable. Okay, so no disease that can be treated by diet should be treated by any other means. So there's a lot of things that we can do with our diet that can alter how we feel and our need for our body's need to dump this bile acid, the bile steroids, etc. Okay, so why isn't there a functional approach to common GI issues or disorders? We often ask that question in my office, but the reality is, because the doctors are trying to keep you safe. They want to rule out everything that's dangerous. So if for any reason you have something dangerous going on, obviously you do need to go see your GI doc. But when you get diagnosed with bile acid diarrhea or IBS-D or bile acid malabsorption, now you're stuck in a place where they don't really have anything that's a long-term natural solution. Okay, so what I did is what I alluded to in the beginning was I created a course for this. And this is, as far as I know, the only bile acid diarrhea online course. So something that you can do on your own. You don't have to call my office. You don't have to pay doctor bills, things like that. It's just an easy way to get to it. So why make a knowledge-based course? This is a really interesting question because in some conditions, people don't really need to know more information. But in the case of bile acid diarrhea, the information that's out there is so wrong that we have to actually educate you so you know why you're experiencing this, and so then you understand how to treat it. So that's the big thing. So if you keep thinking that you're making too much bile acid, and that's what you're treating, you're trying to decrease bile acid by taking even natural stuff, right? So you take a plantain powder, or you go and take a red yeast rice to decrease cholesterol. Those might be temporary solutions. They might help 10%, 20%. But if you're looking for the big recovery, you need the knowledge. And so, a quote from myself that I quoted myself, which is kind of a funny way to do it, but I did it anyway. I say, the first step to recovery is knowledge. I see thousands of patients each year throwing supplements at bile acid malabsorption that could have easily healed already if they had the knowledge of what the root cause was. So in this case, your knowledge is important. And most people are trying to sell a course based upon symptoms. Like if you take these 7 pills for the rest of your life, then you're going to feel better. But usually they're just Band-Aids. Okay, and conventional doctors don't really have the time to worry about, I'm going to call it a functional condition, right? So you don't have pathology of your colon. They haven't been able to document that your intestines actually have something serious going on. They're not quite sure. Luckily, because I had it for myself for 2 years, and I've been where you're at. I've been to where I only ate one meal a day. I've been to 30 different bathrooms in a single day, where you go to the restaurant and you can't make it through the meal, when you won't even drive. I have 2 offices, and the distance between the two is about 30 minutes. And there's times when I couldn't make that trip because I would not have made it to the bathroom in time. So once again, I'm aware of this kind of diarrhea that's really aggressive and hard to deal with. And that's why I created this course. Okay, so what's included? What I want to do, you have to understand who I am. I'm not big into fluff, and I don't want to give you too much information, right? You don't need to have a medical degree to be able to implement my protocols, right? So we simplified the approach so that you can figure things out. You'll be able to figure out some of the triggers that are there, because we'll go through a protocol the same way that I had to do it when I had diarrhea. Okay, so give you some foods to avoid, supplements to avoid. Every single patient that I run into is almost always consuming at least one supplement, usually a food also, but at least one supplement that's making their bile acid diarrhea worse, and they don't know that. And then lastly, what supplements will work the best? That's probably one of the biggest items that people need to know. There's a million supplements out there. Trust me, I've tried thousands and thousands of dollars of supplements. Given that it's my job and my business, I'm always trying new supplements to see if I can implement any into protocols with my patients or with new conditions that come up each year in health. And I've spent a lot of money on supplements. I started when I was buying supplements when I was 12 years old, so we're many years later past that. But so what I want to do is simplify what supplements will actually work for what you have going on. And the last secret is the most important for bile acid diarrhea, but it's counterintuitive. It's not what you think. If I hadn't suffered from it, there are countless secrets that I would have never known. But once I figured out mine and applied it to thousands of other patients, not just patients with bile acid diarrhea, but any kind of diarrhea, most cases end up being very much the same. So that's the secret. You have to figure out what the root causes are. If you figure out those root causes, you're going to do a lot better. So my invitation to you is that you join me. If you're tired of urgent trips to the bathroom, avoiding long car rides, constant painful digestive issues, and avoiding food all the time, if you want to go anywhere or do anything, then why don't you come and join me? I've discounted the course from $497 down to $97. And at this time, we're only going to take 10 course members at a time. As one person graduates, then the next spot will become available. If you're seeing this presentation, it means it's still available. I turn it off when it's unavailable. I turn it on when it is available. If you need additional support, obviously my office is a real doctor's office. We do phone consultations throughout the nation, throughout the world. And then if you still have questions, we do have a dedicated bile acid diarrhea course staff. Office email is timberlineholistic@gmail.com. Once again, join me online. It's only $97 right now, and we'll see you on the inside of the course.